Let's continue our discussion about writing well. This is often a difficult conversation to have with people in a PhD program because you have been in school for a long time, you've gotten good grades in all of your classes, including English and writing classes. What more is there to learn? Ramsey's principle number 1 isn't in play here. People usually have a good understanding of the rules of English grammar, and that's not a problem. But if you don't know them cold, you should. What is more often an issue is translating what you learned in your college and high school classes into academic writing. Here is where sometimes you need to unlearn what you learned before. One major problem in technical writing that often comes up is that people have abstract ideas of the things that they're writing about, and there are subtle nuances, and you end up with 6 or 7 different ideas that don't have consistent names, and the relationships between them aren't explained. You should think about this like writing a play. If you have read a play, you probably have noticed that at the beginning of every play there's a cast of characters, and that's the way you should be thinking about writing this sort of paper. Who are the characters that are going to show up? What are the algorithms? What are the approaches? What are the models? What am I going to call them in a way that will make it clear to the reader what their roles are, what's important, what is my contribution here, and what comes from previous work? Once you have that cast of characters, refer to them as individual actors and use them with strong verbs so that the information flows, so that you can emphasize what's new, and that the ideas in individual units of thought are clear. And once you have structured them, create sections that have parallel structure so that if you use one organizational idea in section 2, that will be reflected in section 3 and section 4 as long as it's necessary. Oftentimes students list, and this is a good way of pre-writing. You need to list all the stuff that's important. But then, after you've listed it, you need to make it coherent. So don't just write the list and stop. Write the list and then turn it into coherent prose. So let's dig into these a little bit deeper. And none of this will be easy. You need to practice. This will not come immediately. You need to show it to other readers, because every writer needs a reader, and this will come eventually with time. You also need to practice. Deliberate practice, make it part of your routine. One thing about writing clearly is that you want to use the active voice. Oftentimes you have learned in high school, is often the worst offender in the United States, that you should use the passive voice when you're writing scholarly prose. But I disagree with this pretty harshly. This often stilts papers and makes them unpleasant to read, and it's not fun to write this way either. Beyond that, more importantly, take a look at this example here. These properties were thought desirable. Who thinks that they're useful? Is it the author of the paper? Is it some standards body? Is it legislation? Say who is actually doing this. The passive voice isn't just unfun to read and to write. It also obscures agency and makes it harder to understand who is doing what or why it's happening. Another thing that you often need to unlearn, using complicated language. And sometimes you want to feel important, and your ideas are important, and so we need to use complicated words for complicated ideas, and that's usually not the right approach. So you should indeed be as specific as possible, but don't make things more complicated than they need to be. You can simplify your ideas and say what you mean. And once you figure out how to make everything as simple as possible and as specific as possible, you often get to this right balance between complexity and specificity. And that is where really excellent scientific writing lies. You do need to be specific, but don't be overly complicated when you don't need to be. Let's see an example of this. To demonstrate whether the proposed metrics align with actual human experiences and examine the quality of model output, we conduct human evaluations. So this is a lot of complicated prose with unspecific verbs. The language is more complicated than it needs to be, and there are verbs like conduct that mean nothing. And so you could replace this with do. We do human evaluations. So use verbs that actually convey the meaning. So let's try to rewrite this. Another thing that was kind of hidden in all of this is that what are you evaluating? Let's rewrite this to check whether the proposed metrics agree. So let's use a more specific verb, agree, with listeners. We ask listeners if they can understand the lyrics and ask singers how hard it is to sing the song. So we're being much more specific about what we're writing about. Say what you're actually doing. We're asking listeners whether they like something or not. Once you have individual sentences that make sense, you need to order them correctly. Let's take a look at this example where it's talking about security proofs. Suddenly, you get the game playing technique out of nowhere. Where did this come from? How does this connect to cryptographic protocols? This is totally new. You want to move from old to new and connect the old ideas to the new ideas. It should be clear when you're introducing something new. And so when the reader sees something like that, the game technique, oh, did I miss that in a previous section? Do I need to go back and read it? No, it's new, but you should make it clear to the reader that it is actually new. You can lampshade this by saying, Zhang et al. Introduce Y, we call this X because, but above all, explain how it fits into the context and don't hide the new stuff. Let's see how you could rewrite this. This is, again, an example from Dreyer. To make it easier to manage such proofs is how you introduce this and say explicitly that Jones et al. Have proposed a new design principle. Using the word proofs explicitly connects it to the previous sentence that is talking about security proofs of cryptographic protocols. And then you introduce a new design principle called the game playing technique. Then you link the next sentence to the thing that you just introduced. This technique follows yada yada. You've explicitly made it clear that you're introducing something new and connecting it to the old stuff. And then as you carry on with the new stuff, it's clear how this connects to what you just introduced. But flow is not enough. So here's another example from Dreyer. A perfectly lovely paragraph with good flow between the individual points, but what is this paragraph about? You get to the end, and then there's this bit, whether house cats can be trained to be more sociable, that's kind of dancing around the main idea here. And what is the main idea? That needs to be at the very beginning. It aids the skimming. This should be the first sentence of the paragraph and helps to organize your own thoughts. So like one way to write a section is to go through, write the topic sentence of each paragraph, then fill in all of the paragraph in that section. The topic sentence of this paragraph should actually be, there appears to be a negative correlation between the charisma of a species and its ability to survive. That's the main idea. Then you can give the details about how this relationship plays out with lions and house cats. This is just a single lecture from a course. YouTube likes to show you these videos out of order, but if you go to the course webpage linked below, you can see the lectures in the right order. And you can get resources like homeworks or suggested reading. You can also visit quanta.org if you want to learn about our systems for creating computers that can answer questions, where Quanta stands for question answering is not a trivial activity. If you want to help the channel, provide a big gradient to the algorithm by liking and subscribing.